How did Pedro Pascal hurt his back during The Mandalorian?
I'm guessing from carrying the entire franchise on his back.
From carrying the entire Star Wars franchise. You're exactly right. It's not fun if you guess it. Okay? Listen, speaking of Pedro Pascal and The Mandalorian, I want to talk about... Listen, everybody's talking about Boba Fett this, Boba Fett that, the Book of Boba Fett. He's out there fetting about. I haven't watched it. I'll be honest, I haven't watched it. Does he fed about? Probably. Has he got a jetpack, a little helmet? I assume so. Instead, let's talk about a show that's been out for quite a while, which is The Mandalorian. And specifically, I wanted to talk about the opening scene of the show. Technically, there's a few frames before this, but it is the opening bar fight of The Mandalorian, wherein which The Mandalorian walks into this bar on like kind of it's like an icy snow planet. He walks in, says basically nothing the entire time he's in there. Kind of enters the frame. The wind of the door, which is, I guess, a thing, spills this dude's drink. And I guess the assumption here is that the guy realizes, hey, this guy's a bounty hunter, or he's just drunk and dumb. Doesn't matter. Mando goes in. This guy decides to pick a fight with him. He's saying, you spilled my drink. And the bartender's trying to defuse it. And as he does this, the Mandalorian kind of stands there stoically. And this dude decides, hey, now is my opportunity. I'm going to fight this guy who clearly looks pretty tough and is wearing a full set of armor. And then Mando basically snaps on this dude and his 3 or 4 guys in order to, first of all, dispatch them and then recover the, I don't know what you call it, but like recover the custody of this blue fish dude. I don't know if that's racist.
It was just a kidnapping. He stopped a kidnapping and then kidnapped the kidnappee. I mean...
Is it stealing if it's already stolen? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like that thing of like, but if I steal a stolen car, is that technically not illegal? What do you think of this scene? Okay, first of all, what do you think of The Mandalorian? And then what do you think about this scene? What's your vibe straight out the gate?
Yeah, I am a pretty big fan of the show. Now, once you get into it and you start breaking down like the actual point of half of the episodes, they definitely don't make sense. A bunch of it is just episode filler that doesn't really have much point. But having said that, there's a lot of really cool stuff that fits really well within the kind of the mythos and the feel of Star Wars, if nothing else. That's what a whole bunch of people were saying when this came out, was that it's the first thing in a long time that felt like Star Wars. Going back to a lot of the stuff that we had discussed in previous episodes, whether that was the exterior of them getting all of the props and all of the scenery correct, and so that felt like Star Wars, or whether it was also them getting the interior stuff so that in the show itself, it also like was Star Wars at its core. So maybe it was a combination of both of those things. But everyone's been a pretty big fan of it so far. And this first scene was so interesting to get people like hooked right off the bat. Like you could tell, like they wanted something. They wanted something awesome. They wanted something to kind of set it apart. And it was, I don't know if cruel is the right word, but if you look at it, I mean, we've never seen a Star Wars something as brutal as cutting a dude. Maybe we have, but cutting a dude in half. I was gonna say Anakin got all his limbs chopped off.
Mace Windu aces what Jango Fett's head off
right in front of his child,
fell swoop.
Too.
So in front of his fucking kid, in front of his like 10-year-old kid, who then goes on to join a bunch of criminals and then gets in prison for a bit. We've seen some brutal shit. But this is cool. This is like a cool way to open a show. Like, and the thing that impresses me the most is that this is an opening scene in such a way that, like, if you don't care about Star Wars or know what Star Wars is, this completely tracks and makes sense. And that's the thing that astounds me the most. The girl I was seeing at the time, we sat down to watch this, and she didn't know shit about Star Wars, and she watched this opening scene, and she's like, "This is fucking sick." Like, it has an appeal to it. Because it choreographs and it relays so much about the world and the characters within it in very subtle ways. It gives our character a placeholder name that you can just like immediately slap on, right? The first thing the guy calls him is Mando. Easy, bang. Because it's not in English, it's easy to digest. It flags less as weird, right? Because the show was called The Mandalorian. The main character being called Mando should be like, isn't that a little on the nose? But because it's in like a different language, it doesn't clock as much. And I think also to your point there, it it feels cool in a way that Westerns feel cool, and a way that like the inspiration of Westerns, which is obviously like you kind of your Seven Samurai type stuff. It has a snappy simplicity as well. There's not a lot going on, right? It's mostly fists. It's mostly punches and stuff. But then you also get a quick reveal of like what are Mando's like key kind of things he's good at, right? He's good at fist fights. His armor is very helpful. He's good at shooting a gun, and he's got like a grapple thing in his arm. I don't know if grapple thing is the technical term. I can only assume so. But like you get a pretty quick kind of download of what makes this character especially interesting to follow. And then subsequently, after he dukes these guys, he does not, like, he's not a nice guy. He's here for the bounty. He's not going to give in to this dude's pleading. It sets up so much the characterization and just like so much groundwork in like 4 minutes tops. Like this is a 2 minute, it's a 1 minute 51 scene according to this clip, but all in all, it's like a 3 minute sequence that tells us immediately what are the stakes, what's this dude's deal, what is he good at. And that's really fucking hard to do in any context of anything ever. Like openings are the hardest thing to write. They are the thing that they go to the editing bay so many times, because what you end up doing is you end up with this whole story that sits behind it, and you come back and as you manipulate and massage that full story, you re-edit that introduction again and again and again and again, because it has to deliver so much subliminal world building exposition and so much character work that you go in these fucking circles as the deadline approaches, trying to rewrite that shit. And this feels effortless. Like it's effortless, it's stylish. This is the first clip that we've looked at where I'm like, I just really like everything about it.
And it's so interesting, all of those points that you just said, like the way that it establishes the basis of the story and the character, and it does all of that without him having to say a word. That's
the craziest.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk. Talk about show don't tell. Like he doesn't say anything. Mm-hmm. That's just, I'm mad about how good this is. Like, this is up there with, like, I'm mad about how good the Lord of the Rings films are. I'm mad about this introductory scene, because I didn't write it. It's so good. A few other things that I just think are interesting before we really dive into it. This is a Star Wars bar. It's full of weird Star Wars creatures, and I like that. We didn't get enough of that in the sequel trilogy. Just a weird fucking place on a rock with, like, a bunch of weird aliens with weird faces and shit, and I'm into that.
And I'm trying to really figure out what it is. When Mando walks in the room, he's framed by either a rib cage or the bones of a claw from like a rancor or something like that. And it's a really cool image of him. It looks like he's actually in the grasp of a rancor, and he's just walking through the dead bones as he's coming into the room. So there's some neat imagery as he's coming in as well. I don't know how much of that comes across to people, but there's got to be some psychology of seeing that in the background, and part of you was like, oh, he's dangerous just from seeing this image. But something else that struck me.
They're huge too. Hey, like that's the height of a guy. Like there's a guy in the right of that frame. And this is I mean, that guy's weird looking too.
Yeah, he's got
like two eyes and shit.
Yeah.
What the fuck? 4 eyes. Why did I say he's got 2 eyes? That's a fucking... People with 2 eyes, fucking weirdos. Strange looking. Yeah. It's that subliminal kind of like... Yeah, it must do something to your psychology, hey, because it's like you don't clock that consciously, but subconsciously it's like, all right, teeth, more dangerous, like... Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and something else that that you were talking about when you mentioned that the big scary dude, he's the one that name drops the word Mando, which is what we use the rest of the time, and it made me think about when we were doing our last group thing, and Eric was talking about Rogue One, and how the beginning of that was so pivotal because it not only introduced every character, but it named every character, so that when you saw them, you knew their name, you knew how to identify with them. And right off the bat, without Mando saying a word, we know what he's referred to as, and we know what his armor is called. He says Beskar. Is this Beskar
That's
armor?
right.
So,
which is a big theme of this first season.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
It hadn't even occurred to me.
Yeah, and there might be a lot more that's kind of indicated in here. Something else would be we get to see his kit. So we see the grappling hook. We see that he carries his cowboy style pistol down on his right side. So it's kind of interesting. We also see how strong Beskar is because they drag a knife across it, and granted, metal should stand.
There's a bullet shot that he deflects.
Yeah. So at the very least, the getting shot by it and being perfectly fine should show that it's stronger than like average stormtrooper armor, which is made to kill you, apparently.
Also, what's interesting is that the question is not, is that Beskar? It's, is that real Beskar steel?
Yeah.
The implication being that Beskar is so rare and of a different era that it seems unlikely to most people that he's really a Mandalorian, or that this is like authentic. And again, like that kind of world building is so subliminal, and it creates this consistency that happens in the back of your mind when these concepts begin to come up later, where when it becomes pivotal, like a big piece of this first season is the Mandalorian completing his armor set. When that stuff arises later, you know why it's important already subconsciously. They don't need to explain to you, hey, Beskar is a big fucking deal, because every time he meets someone, they're like, I'm gonna kill you and take your fucking armor because that shit is legitimately valuable. Like there is a texture to the way that it's able to execute this stuff that I think in the hands of a worse writer, there is a world in which this character doesn't say, is that real? They say, is that real Beskar steel? I've heard that goes for 20,000 grubles on the black market. Like, there is a world in which George Lucas writes this, where you can't not explain stuff. And the restraint displayed here is tremendously impressive to me, because like, Star Wars is fucking cool, and this is a fucking cool scene, and it's really hard as a writer to not be like, look at how fucking cool this is. Oh my god, look at how cool. Oh, it's so cool. Look at how cool. And the writers are like, they have a deftness where they're able to show us this kind of display of subconscious world building and kind of subliminal construction and exposition and action without doting on any specific detail too much. Like, you could, in a different world, they dote on the action too much. There's a bit more fighting. It goes on for a bit longer. In a different world, they dote on the world building, the example I was using before, where they try and explain everything. In a different world, they dote on the setting too much. You spend too much time in the bar before he enters. There are so many different versions of the way that you could cut, write, and execute this that focus too much on one thing at the expense of everything else. And this manages to get the balance right, where everything is rendered in such a way and conveyed in such a way that no specific aspect is paid particular attention. And that's what makes it feel so consistent and coherent, is that you don't have another minute of action. You don't have another minute of exposition. You don't have another minute of dialogue. You don't have another minute of, off-screen bar work. It's kind of the efficiency and the restraint is, I guess, the thing that I'm most impressed by. And then I suppose we should probably talk about all the Star Wars shit in here, probably. So can we talk about Mandalorians real quick? At the risk of this becoming a 5-hour conversation. So Mando is a descendant of the Watch, which is and I'm really stretching my Star Wars knowledge. So the Watch is the insurrectionists on Mandalore from the Clone Wars TV show, and the dude in charge wields the black saber, and by the way gets immediately axed and aced by Obi-Wan. But so Mando is like a descendant of this insurrectionist movement that are like religious zealots that start on Mandalore. What Mando doesn't know, because it's been so many years, like it's been how many? I guess like 2 generations. How does Star Wars time work? Or is it like 30 years? Like because it's hard. It's like, it feels like ages, but it's not that long. Yeah.
And part of that could also just be that, like, he grew up in a cult and they don't teach good history in those places. So
They might be motivated to not disclose certain things.
Yeah, so they might have told him, like no Mandalorian has shown their face in 2,000 generations. So he's like, I'm not going to be the first one. I'm not taking off my helmet.
Despite the fact that 20 years ago in the cartoon, motherfucker isn't wearing a helmet when he fights Obi-Wan. But there's this great clip from the No Clip documentary on the making of Doom where Hugo Martin is like talking about cults. Hugo Martin was the game director on the reboot of Doom. And he's like, cults, when you enter them, everything is like roses and really well polished, where they're like, yeah, it's all great. It's all fantastic. And you get to like you get to the next level and they tell you a bit more secrets and you're like, oh, now I start to see the full picture. And you get to like the full level and they tell you all the crazy bullshit where they're just like, here is everything laid out. Here is like the whole truth about all we're doing. This has been a scam the whole time. We knew about it the whole time. Right. And this to me is like, Mando is at like, has been at and has stayed at his entire life, that first level. Like, because he was raised into this as an orphan kid, at like, quite a young age from what we see later in the series. And so you're absolutely right. He doesn't even have like a radar for this shit. Like, he's got no compass for how insane this all sounds when you lay it out on the table.
There are going to be video clips of Scientology going through this, by the way. Like,
yo, it's on that level though, actually. Like, it's up there. I mean, but then the other thing is like, if and this is the thing that I want to be as empathetic as possible at this point, because if you're raised into that, you don't get to develop a radar for what seems, unusual or unlikely. Mm-hmm. And to add fucking salt to the wound, one of the core tenets of this particular cult is that you don't take off the helmet and make eye contact with people. So your ability to generate and sustain authentic connection with people is naturally like dissuaded by the mechanism. And that's again how cults work. By the way, if you have this should be revolutionary to anyone, that's cults. They will deliberately put in processes and procedures in order to other you from the rest of society. But in his particular case, it's a literal visor that is separating him from the world. And that might, as much as that's heavy-handed, that does become a theme in this series, where it's not till the kind of second season where he, he's able to take his visor off and not completely freak out about it. But yeah, that is interesting.
It's also interesting that you brought up his backstory and what his character would be like as a result of that, because that's something that I've talked a lot about with both Rey and Finn, that, she was raised like as a homeless orphan on this desert planet where she would not have the mentality and the personality that she does. Realistically, she would be cruel. She would be stealing every opportunity. And Finn, he would not be as humorous and kind as he is because he was raised as a warrior soldier from the time that he was a child. Like, and it's the same thing with Mando. Like, maybe his cult was fine with saying, we're going to love each other, and so he still developed some good morals. But at the same time, he still would have had less humanity than someone who was raised without that helmet, without those like really strict conditions.
That is interesting. How do you feel about Mandalorians becoming like a central focus of this show? Because one of the things that's tricky about Mandalorians is that Boba Fett was such a non-character. He was just like a cool toy you could own, effectively. Yeah. And they're taking this thing that was so doted upon in the extended universe and then subsequently in Clone Wars, and they're making it, kind of a central piece and a real focus. As a Star Wars guy, as the only Star Wars guy that I know, how do you how do you feel about that? Because I've people are real hot and cold in this,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of characters that are kind of like fan favorites, but they only are on screen for like a second or two, and they just like they look really cool or something happened that was really neat, and then they'll get a whole lot of backstory in the comics or the books or something like that. Or I mean, even just fanfics can make a character kind of popular. But it's interesting, right after the first episode of Boba came out, and it finished rolling through the credits, and then it popped up a suggested thing on Disney Plus for like the story of Boba Fett. So I was like, okay, I'm going to watch it. And it was like the backstory of when the character was introduced And it was really interesting to look at because he did pop up out of nowhere, and they started promoting him out of nowhere. So they were sending Darth Vader and Boba Fett on like a massive parade route, and everyone knew Vader because this was like right before Empire, I think, and no one knew Boba, but everyone was still going up to him and saying autographs, take pictures with me, all this kind of stuff.
Fucking Star Wars.
Because he just looked wicked cool.
He's so cool looking.
Yeah, and like for the most part, that's all you need to have a really intriguing character because humans are so superficial. That's really all it is.
But for this, so you made a comment before that I think relates to this directly, which is like that some of the pieces of The Mandalorian feel really superfluous. There are particular episodes that feel like filler. However, I will once again make an argument that is unnecessarily contrarian, which is that I think that's kind of what Star Wars should be, right? Like in Lucas's imaginary, he was going for the kind of 60s and 70s kind of disconnected space spaghetti western romps where like you could, and that's why Star Wars is not episode 1, it's episode 4. Like the first movie is episode 4, is that you come into the middle of a story, you kind of work out what the players are as you go, and then just like some stuff happens. It's the Buck Rogers type construction, right? And that's what westerns at the time were like. That's what, fantasies were like at the time, with these kind of disconnected standalone stories that if you put them all together, you got something larger from it, but they were all genuinely and authentically completely unique. And completely standalone in a way that is really compelling. And that's kind of why I like The Mandalorian, is that you just, every episode, you get dropped into like a new setting and a new location, and you just have to like work out what the frick is going on. And like, yeah, there's an overarching story, and yeah, that takes over by the middle of season 2, and it just becomes about that narrative. But like, in the same way that my favorite things about a show like Doctor Who, for example, are the early seasons of the reboot where Russell T Davies is like, hey, here is a bunch of, they just land on a planet or at a particular time, and here is a standalone story. Mm-hmm. And the characters have to go through some challenges and change as people, and then it's going to end, and then you're going to get a completely new episode the next time. And sure, there are things that connect through, like relationships build and change and stuff, but for the most part, you can put any episode of the first 4.5 seasons of Doctor Who in front of someone with no prior knowledge, and they can just enjoy it. You could just play Midnight, which is one of the greatest episodes of that show of all time. You could just play that for somebody without knowing anything about Doctor Who, and it completely works. It explains itself. It's perfect. And I think that's where it's interesting to me that Star Wars is like, hey, here's a cool guy, and people are like, fuck yeah, cool guy. I like cool. What is his deal? Because that's what the structure of those films and the structure of the things that Lucas is basing his genre construction on is, you jump into the middle of a story and you see a cool guy and you want to know more about that cool guy, and then you learn about that cool guy, and then the story's over. That's the structure. So to an extent, like, I feel two ways about it, because it's cool and I love it and it's really interesting, but also they didn't do anything with that character. like it would be different. It's different than Jabba the Hutt, for example, where they do a lot with, where they do a lot more with Jabba than they do with someone like Boba Fett. Boba Fett isn't really a player. Like, he's a background dude. And it's weird to me that then in the extended universe, they're like, yeah, and then he escaped the Sarlacc pit, and then he did all this stuff. And then he's actually part of like this crazy race of people, and the armor is like the extent to which that then spirals out into its own thing is cool and fun, and like it's very George Lucas, but also he's nobody. Like, he's not a player in those stories. And that's where I feel conflicted about it. Like, he doesn't feel worth doting on, and that's cool. Like, that's why he's interesting to explore. But then the other part of me as a storyteller is like, but like he doesn't do anything. Like, he's not an active player. I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I'm 50-50 on it.
Well, going into that whole bit was initially talking about the idea of like one-off episodes where it's a quote-unquote filler episode that doesn't really contribute to the overall story, and the comparison with Doctor Who is really interesting, because I think that I would say that with Doctor Who, everything feels like it's part of the overall arc of his character. Like, every little story teaches you something about him, or he's learning a further lesson, and it also teaches the audience something. Like the whole episode where they were trying to get rid of the monsters in the little boy's closet, and then they get shrunk down and they're fighting dolls and stuff, and the whole thing turned out to be the little kid was a wish from the mom or something. I can't even remember whatever the moral was. It was a good moral. It was help the people who need help, and we'll learn from it, we'll grow from it. And I don't think that this show has the same thing. Like, each side mission that feels like it's a one-off is just, let's find a part of the ship, let's find a part of my armor, we'll have some fights, we'll meet some new people, but the only thing that comes out of it is that new piece of armor or that new ship. The character doesn't actually grow. He's growing his inventory, or he might be getting a step closer to a physical destination, but it doesn't feel like the arc of his character is really progressing in the same way that those Doctor Who episodes feel like they feel like I gained something from watching that, even as an audience member. Like, I don't feel like I gained anything from watching these one-offs with Mando, aside from just 40 minutes of entertainment. It doesn't have the same emotional moral message that Doctor Who always has. But I mean, Doctor Who is definitely superior, so
yeah, that's interesting. You picked a weird episode. We can't get too deep into my Doctor Who opinions, because we will be here for like 12 hours.
Rain check on that.
Serious. Anything that Moffat touches when he's showrunner just like falls to dust. He's just like, anyway, he hires two great leads. Like, he gets Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi and completely fucking wastes them. It is unbearable to watch him write. I can't. We simply can't, Darth. We simply can't. Because how do you write that badly every episode? How do you sit down at your keyboard for the last ever episode, as showrunner? Last ever episode that you write, you sit down at your laptop and you type the words, "There was no evil plot." That's the dialogue that you have. Peter Capaldi, one of the greatest actors, you have him say, "There was no evil plot." You write that in your script, and then you take that and you film it. What the fuck, dude? What are we doing? So anyway.
It's interesting how much that reminded me of J.J. Abrams. Like, if he had done a long series like that, I think we would be making the same exact arguments. Like, he might have some good initial ideas, but everything just sadly ends up crashing.
The best episodes that Stephen Moffat ever wrote were under Russell T Davies, where Russell T Davies slapped his hand away from the keyboard and said, "No, don't do that." And they had, because the conditions were they had to be standalone and they had to have like a contained arc. And if you go back and you watch the episodes that Stephen Moffat wrote under Russell T Davies, they are the best episodes of the show, period, right? Blink is not just one of the best episodes of Doctor Who, it's one of the best episodes of television that exists. The Empty Child, right? The two episodes set in the Blitz, right? Phenomenal, like just incredible. Like Moffat, when he is sitting under somebody that is able to restrain him or provide him structure, he's fantastic. When he gets his own reins to do what he wants, there is something that happens where he's unable to, and it's just a skill that not everybody has. Like, don't get me wrong, I like him as a writer, but he just doesn't have the skill to be he doesn't have the skill of being good at a showrunner, and not everybody does. And like, there is a difference between being really good at writing episodes of a show and being really good at running a show. And you can see that with something like Sherlock, for example, where the longer that Sherlock goes on, the worse and worse it gets, to the point where like the last episode is beyond parody, the kinds of stuff that's in it. Like, watching that episode is insanity. Like, it is just for as an example, the villain ends up being, or the setup of the villain is that Sherlock had a best friend in childhood that he forgot, that he remembers as a dog, that was killed by his sister that he also forgot, who ends up being the big baddie, who subliminally was working with Moriarty before he died to develop subliminal messaging and videos to then create an escape room that then 5 years later, after his death, they will then put our protagonists in. Like, and that's literally what happens. And so it's like, you can see how as time goes on, he he can't keep it contained. Like, he just can't. It's just not his skill he has. And so when thinking about something like in the context of a serialized television program, the challenge that you face is, how do you write these standalone segments where you go to a place and you do something and the characters change slightly without ending up with the Moffat problem of they change so much that by the time that you're done and you get to the end of the series, you have to keep iteratively raising the stakes in a way that they become ridiculous. Like, how do you balance that? And yeah, The Mandalorian season 1, it struggles to be interesting sometimes because it's so concerned with that pacing. Whereas season 2 is a lot better at like showing the Mandalorian, is it Jin, or how do you say, is it Jin? What's it? Din Djarin? Din Djarin.
Close enough.
Showing that Mando is growing and kind of struggling with his intimacy with Baby Yoda, right? Like, that's his kind of growth there. And so I think season 1 struggles because like it doesn't give us enough of that. And yeah, there's arcs kinda, but like it really doesn't, you know, like he gets close to the drop trooper, and you can see them developing like a kind of friendship, which is the first friendship we've seen with him. Same with old mate who's head of the bounty hunters. Like there are changes going on in his character, but they aren't significant enough to what you're saying, which is like for those standalones to necessarily feel like growth. And I think that's because like we don't, and I just have this thought now for the first time, which is maybe it's because we don't know Mando well enough to know if his behavior is how he's always done it or if it's growth and change until season 2.
So we could be seeing growth this whole time and we just didn't even know it.
Yeah, and it's like, because I'm thinking about, you know, when he interacts with that young cowboy type character, where he's on a bounty with this guy and you know, he doesn't trust this cowboy, and then later on he trusts the dropship lady to, you know, help him out and stuff. We don't necessarily know if like where that growth is because we don't have enough of a compass of this dude's character. And that's a challenge of a protagonist who is terse and stoic and doesn't say a lot and whose face you don't see. And so, like, you know, I'm now, I don't know. Like, it's a real difficult thing to pull off, I think.
That just made me think of Geralt in the Witcher series on Netflix. And I mean, he's so much of the same thing where it's just this, you know, bad dude that walks into the bar and he's not going to say anything, but if you pick a fight, he's going to put everyone in the bar down. And it's really hard to tell if he's actually growing as a character because you see so little.
I don't even know. Confession time. I love the Witcher games and the books. I cannot for the life of me work out if that show is good or not. Like, it is the only show where like my kind of fan blinkers, like I just like The Witcher, and so I like the show. I cannot analyze it. I'm incapable. Like it's the one artifact in pop culture. I'm like, I don't know if this is good. It could be bad. I have no idea. I just enjoy it because I like those characters and I like that setting. Like it's weird. I've never experienced. Is it bad, Darth? I don't know.
It is not great.
Okay.
From a pure filmmaking perspective, they skip over so much that just leaves you like questioning the backstory of all of this stuff, like introducing like the witch's whole training thing that they have. Like that could have been like 2 seasons on its own. There was so much information that they kind of just gloss over. You have like 5 different nations that are all warring against each other, which is also glossed over. And through the first season, I'm still trying to figure out which ones are the Nilfgaardians, which ones are these ones, who's wearing what colors, and there's too many names flying around. But at the same time, the reason that I love the show so much is purely because of how Henry Cavill plays Geralt, so which is the same thing actually with Sherlock and Benedict Cumberbatch. Like I don't care how bad the plot is and how bad even maybe the filmmaking is, but I love how he plays Sherlock even more than, you know, Robert Downey Jr. in his version or whatever.
The filmmaking fucking rips in Sherlock. The transitions they do and some of the stuff they do with set design, like it might be one of the best produced and worst written shows that exist.
I can see that. Yeah.
There is some stuff in that which is like so creatively Like it has some of the most creative cinematography of anything I've ever seen in my entire life, in service of just a pile of piss. Just piss. That show is like it thinks if you watch Sherlock, Stephen Moffat thinks you're a fucking moron. Like that. The show is so condescending to its audience. But yes, you're right. I don't know. Every time I talk about it, I just get mad. I
have to do a video on it. One day I have to do a video with you on it so I can approach a series that I love very much, and I can try to be objective about it and admit how much it sucks.
Let me shred it. This is what I want to do. This is my dream podcast. Is a dream show. Is we watch an episode of Sherlock per episode, and then we just talk it through. And there are 3 seasons of that. There are 3 episodes a season. We're not watching the special because I guess we can, but it's all in his mind palace or whatever. But that's not that many episodes of a show. And like, it would make me so happy as a human because I'm not trying to be malicious because again, like I think Stephen Moffat is a good writer. What I find so fascinating about it is how many of the ideas are really compelling and interesting. And the execution is never there. He just can't do it. He just can't sustain it. And what's interesting is the original pilot of Sherlock is infinitely better than the first episode. It's the same plot, but it's 30 minutes shorter. And in that 30 minutes, they cut out all of the bullshit with Mycroft, and they cut out any of the Moriarty references. And it is an infinitely better program as a result. There is something fascinating going on at a production level with that show and this is why I think like Disney is an interesting company, where we talked before about, I believe we talked about it with the sword fight with Rey and Kylo in the throne room. There is something fascinating with Disney's production, where TV production of Disney seems to have a different philosophical structure and framework than the production of the films, in a way that like Favreau seems to be, they just go, hey, Favreau's the guy, he'll get it done because of his creds on Marvel. We're just going to trust him. Favreau's like, by the way, Jon Favreau is like, if you don't know his work, like look the dude up. He is like, he's been consistently exceptional in the film and TV industry for like 2 decades now. He's just like a fantastic
and he's been writing like all these episodes for both Mando and I think Boba too. Like everyone's giving Filoni the credit, but Favreau is doing a lot of the writing here.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting to me as well because like, you know, Filoni so Filoni is clearly a Star Wars fan. If you've watched any of the behind the scenes commentary for Clone Wars, you'll know that like he's a Star Wars guy. And he talks about getting to do these things in Clone Wars that get him, he's so excited about it. He's like, and George pitched us this idea and we did it this way. And George was so intimately involved in the Clone Wars as a TV show. Filoni and Lucas have this connection as 2 people that are so interested and intimately compelled by the nitty gritty of the lore. And then you look at someone like Favreau, and Favreau's thing is like, he just gets how to pick up a property and do something with it. That's his skill set, right? You see that with Marvel, where like you put him in and he just like gets it done and gets it done well. And that to me is, most people can't do that. Like you look at some of this, you look at some of the writers that they've got on things like X-Men, or a lot of the DC, for example. Like you put someone like Snyder in that position, and he just can't get it done. Like for whatever reason, there are people out there in the industry as writers and storytellers and directors who too much of their own voice becomes the focal point. Favreau seems to be this perfect chameleon where he can create a voice for a show like Mandalorian. Like Mandalorian has a really strong timbre and voice and style. It starts to deteriorate a little bit by the end of season 2 where it becomes Star Wars again. But for the most part, like it has its own thing. It's got its own aesthetic. Boba Fett, I imagine, has the same thing. Again, haven't seen it, don't at me. But it seems to me that that's Favreau's specialty. And if we're talking about credit, I think it's tricky because Filoni is clearly a great writer when it comes to Star Wars. But Favreau is a great storyteller writ large. And I think those are 2 different skill sets. And so it's no surprise to me that you put them together in a room and you say, go make a show about a character that doesn't already exist, right? Mando was not, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he's like a new character for the show. And that to me is like fucking genius, because you're not tying them to any existing continuity. No one has preconceptions of how these characters need to behave or act, which is one of the hardest things about the Clone Wars, is anytime you bring in somebody, they have to be consistent with the characterization. And you're not tied to any pre-existing like continuity. You don't have the Clone Wars problem of in 10 years in the fiction, this guy becomes Darth Vader. You don't have that issue. You don't have to like go up to the edge of change and then wind it back, because it needs to happen in the third film. There is something really pitch perfect about where this is placed in the canon. And it's part of why this era is so interesting in the extended universe, and part of why like I cannot express how fucking excited I am about the Obi-Wan TV show.
Yeah.
It is the thing. Ever since they did it in the comics, it's the thing I've wanted so badly. And for them to be like, yeah, we got Ewan McGregor back. We're just doing it. We're doing it right. Our boy's in there. He's going to be acting the shit out of it. It's going to be set on Tatooine. It's going to be like, having seen The Mandalorian and then like the way that executes, I'm so excited for that concept, because they've proved with this series that you can do it and you can do it right. And yeah, there are foibles and there are like kind of meandering episodes. And in particular, to your point earlier, there are moments where I'm like, this could have been 20 minutes shorter and been much better. I think it's got a bit of that problem sometimes. And by the end of season 2, it gets a bit like, here are all of the people in Star Wars you care about. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But it fucking rips ass, man. So good. And like to start this strong and to maintain the strength of the style and the efficiency of the storytelling until like pretty late into your second season it's like some Mad Men level shit. Like, it's pretty impressive.
Now, one interesting thought I had about why they actually chose this story to start with, because this was their first Disney Plus series, and I think a lot of it was actually out of necessity, because they had, from a lot of people's perspective, the sequels were just utter failures, and a lot of people didn't want anything to do with the franchise at all anymore. But Disney can't come out and admit that. In fact, they've been very, very careful not to admit any failure on their part and not to admit that the films were bad in any way. So what is the way around that? Their first Disney Plus show can't be something from the prequels, because that would be admitting, oh yeah, we did bad, we're going to go back and do this other stuff.
Also, people hate the prequels.
Well, they've become a lot more accepted now.
I know, but like, generally speaking,
yeah,
they are not looked upon as good. A lot of us have come around on them because that's what happens with media, but like, yeah.
I mean, my biggest argument there has always been like, we are not saying that the quality of the films has changed at all. Like, you could still look at them and point out all the ways in which they're poorly written, or the dialogue or the acting or whatever you want to say, but the world building that they do is so superior that it makes them just a vital part of the universe. And there is nothing in the sequels that is world building or vital whatsoever. Everything can be completely forgotten about.
And you know why? And it's because it's got politics in it. And I think politics are really interesting. And politics in film and stories is really interesting. The reason people say they hate politics is because they often see politics they don't agree with. And then they say, well, I hate politics in my movies. But like, which is, every piece of art is political by definition. You can't make non-political art. So that argument of like, the sequel trilogy being too political for its use of female protagonists and black protagonists is just like, that's a straw man argument. That's nothing. Everything is political. They just cast characters that they wrote. That is not a political decision to make. The thing that sucks about them is they're not political enough, in my opinion. We have no idea how the citizens and the regular folk feel about either of our key players and key parties in those stories. We don't know how people feel about the First Order or the Resistance. And that's a real problem that the prequels somehow get right. People have really mixed feelings about the Jedi. People have really complicated feelings about the Republic. Like, it is a thing that is focused on. And the fallout of that is the focus of the original trilogy. And the sequel trilogy, just like, it has no real interest in exploring that, to the point where like they blow up the planet where all of the politicians are. Like, it is just not interested in politics in a way that is baffling to me, because Politics are great and interesting, and that's a real missed opportunity in my mind. And to your point, like, I've legitimately never thought about it, but you're right. What else could you have done with Star Wars at this juncture? You couldn't have done anything involving a prequel character because people would have hated it. You couldn't do anything involving a sequel character. You can't do the original cast because they're all old as fuck. Like, and Harrison Ford hates Star Wars. Like, what do you do? I guess this, and then you do it this well? Like, get out of here.
It's really interesting. It's interesting what you were just talking about with politics, because it made me think about the fact that I don't think it's actually the politics that we're missing or that made the first one so great. What it was, and by that I mean, like, we're not talking about like laws and judges arguing about passing laws and that kind of stuff, which is what people normally think when they think politics and Democrats versus Republicans, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about the wider, like, the denizens of the universe being involved in the ongoing drama and having a voice, and us seeing that there are so many people involved in that and seeing the different points of view that they might have. So it's not that we're saying we wanted, politics are good or politics are bad. It's bring in the group of people so we could hear their voice and see how they affect or are affected by the storyline and how they could affect the storyline. Because, like, all of that same stuff that happened with the Senate and all of the voting and all that kind of stuff, like, that could have taken place in so many other different situations, even if it was if you reimagine it and it was a small town and the whole group of all of the citizens of town were gathered there and they were taking a vote as to whether they wanted to stay in the republic or leave. That's not political. That's just a group of people, and they are trying to figure out a problem and how they're going to live with that. And that would have been so much more engaging for the audience to see, versus what we got was so small. It wasn't this vast universe of people.
Yeah. Well, and that's what the Mandalorian gets right, is that every time he's in a location, we get to see how his actions and behaviors affect the people that live there, and we learn how they feel about it. Right? The town where the Mandalorians live under, that becomes a location that changes and evolves over time. They end up with, like, a system of government by the time it's freed from the Empire. And we see how it changes over time, and we see how the Republic settles there, and how the dropship lady, how her work as, like, a Republic sheriff changes that location, and how people feel about it. Like, there is an extent to which, yeah, you're right, local politics are also interesting. And I'm just going to say it, politics are good, actually. I'm taking that stance. Yell at me in the comments. But seriously, this is where I'm interested in, if you're watching or listening, I would love to know, like, what your take is on that with the sequel trilogy, because I think it's a really contentious thing to process and to kind of step back from, because if you watch those films and you go, it's bad because the lead is a woman and she can do all of these things, there is within that a legitimate conversation and discourse to have. The problem is the foundation of the way that those arguments tend to be levied is not in good faith to say, hey, let's talk about this piece of work as a media object. And you've done videos that absolutely do this, right? Your channel is a place where this discourse happens. The problem is, a lot of the time, the people making these arguments are bad actors with a desired outcome that they've already predetermined, and they are using this as a conduit for achieving that outcome, right? They are legitimately bad actors saying, I have decided that these people are wrong and these beliefs are wrong, and I'm constructing an argument that benefits me in some way, usually commercially, right? They're usually selling something, often supplements and stuff like that. And the reason that they do it using these fictional works is that a fictional work can't sue you back. If you say this about a real person, it can be libel, it can be defamation. Using the framework of these fictional texts means that you kind of have, like, a free pass to say whatever you want, and, like, there is no necessary legal recourse, because, like, you're doing commentary and criticism, which is, like, a thing that should be protected by law, by the way. And I will defend their right to say what they want to say, right? I will stand next to them and say, I will defend your rights to levy whatever argument you want, but that also means that I'm allowed to criticize that and deconstruct it and discuss it without necessarily pushing an agenda. Me saying your video about how Rey being a woman is bad, if I'm talking about that, you can't then say they're trying to silence me. That is how discourse works. And I think the trouble we get into when we're talking about Star Wars as a cultural object, and particularly the politics stuff, is it is very often difficult to discern the bad actors from the good faith discussions. And that's because, like, the internet's a big, messy, complicated place. And I wonder to what extent, and maybe it's because we're media crits, I don't know. I wonder to what extent our perception of the way that regular viewers and normal folk perceive those films, those sequel trilogies, is distorted by the loudest and ugliest voices of that part of the space. I wonder to what extent people think fondly of the sequel trilogy because they liked a lot of the elements of it, because they haven't been subjected to those bad actors and those bad faith arguments. And it's all we see because they are the loudest side of the other part of the discourse. And so I'm like, I often think about The Last Jedi, and my dad doesn't like it. He's like, I think it's a bad film. He also didn't like the new Matrix film, which is like a valid opinion. A lot of people don't like that film. But the thing that's interesting to me is he's not online, like looking up, he's not out there watching Joseph Anderson talk about how it's like a cultural Marxist, vehicle for SJW propaganda or whatever, right? He's not out there watching that stuff. He just watched the film and was like, I just didn't like this stuff for this reason. He's not sitting there being like, they've ruined Star Wars. I can't believe it. They've finally done it. Rian Johnson has ruined everything that I love. He's destroyed the Luke Skywalker that I love. He doesn't have that opinion. He's just like, I didn't enjoy the film. And so I'm often cautious of when I say politics is good, actually, I think what I mean is like, it is stories about the way that characters and these big, exciting adventures affect the world around them is the foundation of like what makes things interesting and compelling. Like how a story changes the people that it genuinely should affect is compelling because that's how real life works, right? These big actors and these big people, these politicians, these decision makers, these celebrities, their actions have impacts on the way that the world functions and the way that individuals in the world function. And that's kind of what makes Star Wars a fascinating object. It's not our world, it's a different world. And through that lens, we're able to abstract ourselves enough to learn those moral lessons that you were talking about and to take on board and to interrogate deeply without the risk and fear of interrogating our own world. Like, how do we feel about this thing? How do we feel and react to it? What is our emotive reaction to this brand of fascism or this type of liberalism or this type of revolution? How should I feel and think about that in this abstracted sense? And that's why I really like the prequel trilogies, is they care about that stuff really deeply, and maybe too deeply, which is part of the problem. But like, there is an extent to which Mandalorian feels like the right balance between all of it, where it strikes this careful, like Occam's razor kind of thing, where it's just political enough that it's really interesting and compelling, but not so political that it becomes like a Tolkien-esque history of politics type thing. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on, like, because I do wonder
one interesting thing that triggered when you were talking about how people will use talking about racism or misogyny as an excuse to bash on the films, and like I did a long video that was on that exact topic, and I just got a fascinating comment where they were this person said, I watched for several minutes and I was really confused because I couldn't tell if you were against what you're talking about or for what you're talking about. Like if you hated the movies and are saying this stuff is bad, or if you just are pointing out. And I was like, it's because media critics are not objective. And that's what I very actively tried to just present the info and say, I literally said after each point, I was like, do you think this or do you think this? And I tried to keep my opinion out of it. And it was so shocking for someone to point out how unaccustomed people are. So they're used to, just blatantly, the video essayist will say, this was bad and here are the reasons why. Or this was fantastic and these are the reasons why. And people are not having to form their own opinions off of everything. But that also ties into the whole political thing you were talking about. with your dad, who was very indifferent about not liking something, but that ties into the amount of investment that he had in the franchise to begin with, because it's very difficult to be indifferent about not liking something that is one of your favorite things ever. So in the political realm, and much more towards my definition of just a group of people who are, like communicating maybe on opposite sides, but it is much more of a heated discussion between the people who loved the sequels and the people who hated the sequels versus the people who were mildly indifferent one way or the other. Because if you're indifferent, you didn't care about Star Wars to the level that the people who loved it did. Those are the ones who have the biggest voices, like you said, that we're always hearing these people gripe about how terrible the films were. It's because it's the same 2,000 people that are posting every day and talking with each other every day because they hated how these films ruined their favorite characters, ruined their favorite franchise, etc., etc. I don't know. And then one other point which I thought was interesting was you were talking about how you felt like the Disney shows had a different tone to them than the films did. And I've been thinking that same exact thing about Marvel for a long time. Like, think about their shows. It is so different. Like, I feel like they're made for like 15 and under, but the films are like 15 plus. It feels like it's a whole...
Hang on. You got to specify. You're talking about the Marvel Disney shows, or are you talking about the Netflix Marvel shows?
So like WandaVision.
Okay, so the Disney, because there is a sharp delineation between the Disney TV and then the Netflix TV. The Netflix TV is clearly for 30-year-olds, and the Marvel TV's, the Disney stuff is clearly for, like, you're right, 15 and under.
So that was Netflix would have been like the Daredevil, Iron Fist,
Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, just like really like adult topics, tones, ideas, violence. Like Daredevil just fucking rocks.
Yeah, it was freaking. Actually, one of my coworkers is watching it now, and he's complaining about like how bloody and gruesome it is, and I'm like, it was amazing, but
it's so. Oh, Daredevil's so good, it makes me mad.
Like, that's my biggest gripe with, what's the bow and arrow dude? I feel terrible for forgetting his name.
Hawkeye?
Yeah, so in that show that aired this past holiday season, like, that was my biggest thing, was the entire thing felt like it was a kid's show, because they never shot anyone with a real arrow. Like,
yeah, it was weird. It was weird, or if they did, they cut away. But... yeah, I still found it very charming, but yes,
I did too. I loved it, and it was just that feeling of watching something as a kid, and it was like, oh, this happy, brightly colored thing, and no one is gonna die or get seriously hurt, and it's just a happy kids thing. But that's not. I mean, Marvel has been like killing people, and you see beloved characters die on screen. Like, it's been a very adult thing, and then go into the Disney Plus shows, and it's like it's made for an entirely different audience.
That's interesting. And and that's how I feel about the Star Wars stuff. It feels like the movies are for everybody, and the TV is like, hey nerd, here's some fucking Star Wars shit, you Star Wars nerd. And I'm like, yeah, I like Star Wars. And they're like, here's some more Star Wars stuff. And I'm like, okay, I still like Star Wars, but this is a lot. They're like, here's a show just about Boba Fett. And I'm like, that might be too much Star Wars for me. But then I'm also the guy
I'm waiting for, though, is when Obi-Wan comes out, you realize that will be 3 shows in a row set on Tatooine.
It's a good setting.
Yeah, but how much is too much?
I hate
sand. It's coarse and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
You're not wrong, and there's a lot of it too. And it's my favorite quote from the sequel trilogy is, "Why would you want to go back to Jakku?" And it's like, yeah. It seems like a fucking terrible place to live. I have 2 things before we wrap up. I'm wearing shoes because I'm going out after this, and I've discovered that there is a Band-Aid on the sole of this shoe, and I have not had a Band-Aid on for like 12 months. So this is somebody else's Band-Aid stuck to my shoe, and that's horrifying. I got to deal with that later. But I wanted to read you a comment. So I was saying to you before we hit record that I YouTubed the clip that we were talking about today, and I just wanted to read you a sample of some comments on this YouTube clip, and in particular this chain that is just I was cackling. Do you mind if I'm going to read you just the sequence of this chain because it's phenomenal. So this is the first comment is from Liam Cullens on this YouTube video. And the quote is, "You spilled my drink." And then Liam says, "No, you spilled your drink. Why were you looking for an excuse to pick a fight with one of the deadliest groups of people in the galaxy?" Which is very good. And then Avery Bishop says, "He really wanted his armor." And then Tanushi says, "Don't worry, his vision is augmented." What? Okay. And then Nick Sox replying to Tanushi goes, "What a rotten way to die." Tanushi, "What a shame." Fernando Flores, "That was his mistake. He should never pick on someone who's dangerous than he is." And then the last comment is lip smacking noise. What? What?
I guess they really liked it.
It's everything in that thread reads as like, while you were having sex with girls in college, I was studying the blade. Like it's just the most incel energy of all time. Yeah, listen, it's just, God, it's so good. Another comment that really stands out to me, Scott Gammon, "How does it feel to walk into a room knowing you're the most dangerous person in there?" Which is very good. Let me see. This is just a legitimately funny comment from TomTom. "These doors are dangerous for customers. Imagine getting really drunk and stumbling on your way out. RIP." Oh, that's very good.
Now, I was just watching the clip through again, and something else that just jumped out to me was, like, we were talking about like why they chose this topic to do their first show on. And it's interesting, the very first scene that we have is going into this room, and from what I could tell, everyone in there is a real puppet or something like that. Like, it doesn't look like there's any CGI in this room, and that's something that fans were like harping on big time for a while, was that they hated CG, they wanted everything to be realistic, blah blah blah. And that also, assuming that's true, they built this set, that was something that they intentionally did to draw the fans in right off the bat and make sure that they loved the show.
I hadn't thought about that, but I could definitely see that as them, allaying some doubt. Obviously, in spite of the fact that like that portrays a pretty deep misunderstanding of how filmmaking works, because most of this is shot on a fucking LED sound, LED sound. The thing. You guys know what I'm talking about? The big thing, the Mandalorian thing. You guys know. That's interesting. Again, like it just works.
I'm trying to get it to stop on his cup. Because this has been... The cup? Yes. When his cup gets knocked over, this has been bugging the stew out of me. So, what they went with...
Welcome back to Cinema Sins. Let's talk about the cup.
So, what they went with was the door opened and the wind blew in, knocking the cup away from the wind, right?
Okay.
All right, so our entire interpretation of this scene was 100% wrong. What actually happens, which is even more brilliant, is that when they pick up the green dude, the cup gets knocked over and nobody notices. Then when Mando comes through the door and the wind blows through the room, big dude thinks, "Oh, hey, that is what knocked my cup over." He doesn't even realize he's the idiot who knocked over his own cup, and he's blaming Mando for it. So I'm going to just leave this whole section in here so you could see kind of our thought process while we were going through and analyzing something, and how you could also see how easy it is for something so simple just to completely skip our notice while we're watching. It's really easy to miss a little tiny thing that just kind of completely changes the context of a scene. Theoretically, it would have gone the other way. Because the air inside was hot, the air outside was freezing. That should have caused a vacuum, sucked the warm air out, so the cup should have fallen the opposite way towards the door instead of away from the door. Because all the wind.
Yeah, but look at the. I don't look at the way that Mando's cloak is flapping though. It's flapping like to the inward to the left or something. Oh yeah, either way the cup is. It also it looks like a heavy cup, and it seems on like. Hang on. Is it the wind that knocks it over, or is it that he's startled and he knocks it over?
Actually, that's interesting, because the way that his cloak blows when he walks in, like, kind of reinforces the point that the air is being sucked out of the room, not blown into the room. Because his cloak is billowing the opposite direction than if the wind were blowing in.
Oh yeah, you're not wrong.
So I think they knocked the cup down in the wrong direction. So
well, we found the one fault
the
in this
one
entire
flaw.
scene. It's good. We did it. This for the illusion of balance, we found the one error in this otherwise flawless masterpiece. You're fucking welcome. Also, there's a guy in the shot that's wearing a beanie, which means they have beanies in Star Wars, and that's just very funny to me. Because a beanie is just like not a sci-fi hat in my brain, but there's a guy in a beanie. You're looking at him, right? Look at this fucking beanie.
He's one of the thugs that's kidnapping the Smurf, right?
Oh, he's got a sick metal arm as well.
Yeah.
Look at that claw thing. Holy shit.
That may have been another thing that they did on purpose, just to trigger that little thing in our heads that we're like the tough dude that's kidnapping you. He's obviously got a beanie on. I mean,
yeah. Well, I've seen crime films before. I played GTA 3. I remember. This is a rad. We should talk about more good stuff. I feel like all we ever do is pick scenes where we're like, let me break this apart and ruin it. But this is just fucking sick. Well, There's so many details in this.
It's like I always get in this argument with the guys at work because they'll ask me how I liked a movie that just came out, and I'll list off like 20 things that bugged me about it, and they're like,
I do that.
They're like, why won't you just enjoy something? And I'm like, I do enjoy it. I just like picking stuff that doesn't work, trying to figure out why it doesn't work, and then how could you have made it actually work better? Because like even in the best things I've ever seen, like there's been something that you could improve upon.
My brain is the same way. Like it's just I can read you a quote to take us out that I think perfectly encapsulates this. This is from an interview with a media crit writer, Murray, and Murray has just been he's been writing this series on. Well, at the time of the interview, he's working on playing through all of the Call of Duty games, and he's like. Earlier in the interview, he explains like he really doesn't like them. He doesn't enjoy shooters or war games. So the interviewer says, quote, since academic work often fuses the pleasurable with the productive, either intentionally and overtly or not, can you reflect here on any complicated dynamics of pleasure and joy for you when it comes to teaching, researching, and writing? And Murray says this, and to me, this is like a perfect encapsulation of what you're talking about. Murray says, quote, ironically, my productivity often comes from what bothers me about what I'm seeing rather than a pleasurable relation to the object of study. That is to say, I rarely write from a position of fandom, and I'm even slightly suspicious of myself if my work starts tilting in that direction. For example, my next research project requires, among other things, that I play quite a few military shooter games, which happens to not be my favorite genre. But I have some important things to say that require it. The pleasure comes later in contemplating and writing from a knowledgeable and rigorous position made possible through a sustained engagement with these difficult objects of study. End quote. And I think that's why when somebody from work says, what did you think of that film? That your brain is immediately like, here is the way that I've engaged with it. Here is my critical lens. Yeah. I just think it's one of my favorite quotes of all time because I think it perfectly explains like why our brains are so broken, Darth. Why we're like this, okay? It's not our fault. This is the job. I'm sorry. I like Star Wars, I promise.
We just want to make things better. That's not so bad.
It's not so bad. Is it? It could be. I don't know. I have another. Can I read you another Mandalorian joke before we leave?
Of course.
And we do have to leave because it is. We're deep in the cut here. These are so bad, dude. If people from Mandalore are Mandalorians, are people from Bangalore called Bangaloreans? What? That's not anything. What? Oh, this is good. What does the inside of the Mandalorian's helmet smell like?
What?
Feta cheese. I've never. The best part about that is you've never say feta cheese. You just say feta. Why would it? Feta cheese.
That one got you, didn't it?
Because without the cheese bit, it doesn't make sense. But you never say feta cheese in your life. That's murdered me as well. That's done. Okay. All right. I'm going to press stop because I don't think we can top feta cheese.
I don't know why I decided to mess with your settings when I was already done. Stop it.
Stop it. Oh no, I scrolled. So I've got the scene that we're talking about today on I've just I YouTubed it last night and I've saved this tab, and I made the mistake of scrolling down and looking at the comments. Fuck, Star Wars fans are cringy. I'll read you some of these in the episode, but boy, some of this is rough. Oh God,
that's interesting.
It's a big incel energy.
The first few were all pretty darn positive, but I didn't read too much past that. And obviously, we may have looked at different clips.
I think we might have.
So you somehow you Googled the incel version of this.
I always do. It's the algorithm knows that's what I want.
Okay, well that's our.